They claimed they never saw my wedding invitation, said I was ungrateful, then handed my inheritance to my sister like I was already erased. I didn't argue. I disappeared. Months later, while my sister posed for press at her plaza engagement, I was barefoot on a veranda in the Maldives beside the man who chose me when no one else would. That night, I sent them the will they buried, along with a single sentence: "I'm not asking for anything. I just won't stay silent anymore." The photo had always been there above the fireplace in my parents' living room, right where our grandparents' wedding portrait used to hang. It was Juliet's first modeling headshot, taken when she was 16, her face softly lit, chin, slightly tilted, lips parted just enough to look effortless. Framed in brushed gold with her name engraved in a little plaque beneath it, it stared down at everyone who entered the room like a quiet reminder of who truly mattered. I was 17 at the time, 1 year older, already accepted into the University of Washington's computer engineering program. I had won a regional coding competition that spring, but when I told my mother, she barely looked up from her phone. She said something like, "That's nice, honey," then asked if I'd seen Juliet's new comp card. Growing up in Tacoma, Washington, our house was modest but always perfectly maintained. My mother, Elaine, took pride in the flower beds out front and the spotless kitchen counters. My father, Gerald, was quieter, content to read the paper and nod in agreement with whatever my mother declared to be true. He worked in civil engineering until he retired, but he was never the kind to challenge the family dynamics. Not when it came to Juliet. Juliet was luminous. That's the word people always used. Luminous. She was tall with these ridiculous cheekbones and hair that fell in perfect waves even when she swore she didn't brush it. Teachers loved her. Neighbors praised her. Even people at the grocery store would stop to say how stunning she was. She was a straight-A student, prom queen, captain of the dance team, and according to our mother, destined for greatness. I, on the other hand, liked to take things apart and put them back together. I built my first computer in 8th grade and never cared much for makeup or dresses. I wasn't awkward exactly, just invisible. And in a house where visibility equaled value, that made all the difference. When we were little, Juliet and I shared a room. I remember lying in bed at night listening to her breathing next to me and wondering if she ever felt what I felt. Like everything I did was somehow not enough or not the right kind of enough. At school, my teachers encouraged me. At home, I was the daughter who needed fixing. My mother used to sign me up for yoga classes and clean eating boot camps every summer, even when I begged her not to. Her favorite line was, "If you put in a little more effort, you could look just as lovely as Juliet." She never said it with cruelty. That was the worst part. It was always said gently, like a favor, like guidance. And I believed her. For a long time, I believed her. When Juliet got her first modeling contract at a local agency in Seattle, my parents threw a party. It was catered. My mother wore a new dress. They invited neighbors, family, friends, even her high school art teacher. I remember standing in the kitchen helping set up the hors d'oeuvres while Juliet glided from guest to guest like she'd been born for it. When the agency delivered the framed headshot, my parents unwrapped it in front of everyone. They didn't even ask where to hang it. It was always going above the fireplace. The next year, when I walked across the stage at my university graduation, I didn't expect balloons or banners. But I thought maybe my mother would say something. Anything. She clapped politely, then spent the ride home talking about Juliet's upcoming campaign with a boutique cosmetics brand in Manhattan. That night, I sat on the back steps of the house, the one with the creaky railing my dad kept meaning to fix, and thought about how proud I was of myself. How none of them would ever say it, but I had done something hard. I had built something out of nothing. My degree wasn't just a piece of paper. It was survival. I started keeping mental notes around then. Not out of bitterness. Just to remember. Like the time I got promoted to junior engineer and mentioned it during Thanksgiving. My father nodded and passed the cranberry sauce. 5 minutes later, my mother pulled out her phone to show everyone Juliet's latest photo shoot in Paris. Like clockwork. There was always a hierarchy in our home. Juliet's achievements were events. Mine were background noise. Still, I kept trying. I took the jobs. I bought my own car. I paid off my loans. I learned how to hold my own in meetings with clients who doubted me the moment they saw my face. I built a small private world where I was enough. But I never stopped feeling that tug whenever I walked into my parents' house and saw that gold frame above the mantel. She was the one they built the house around. I was the one who just walked through it. It wasn't just the photo. It was everything that photo represented. And for a long time I thought if I just tried hard enough I could earn a space beside it. When I was 16, I asked my mom if I could try out for the dance team. She blinked surprised, then nodded and said it would be good for my coordination. I practiced every evening for 2 weeks, pulling muscle after muscle, but never made it past auditions. The coach told me I was too stiff. Juliet laughed and said I moved like a robot in gym shorts. That night, I ate half a pint of ice cream and tossed the rest into the sink before my mom could see it. At 17, I was 10 pounds lighter, my hair chemically straightened, and I had swapped my black hoodies for pastel cardigans. It didn't feel like me, but I thought maybe it would help. Maybe I'd be noticed. Maybe I'd hear something other than, "If only you'd put in just a little more effort." Around that time, my mother asked me to come with her to a meeting. She didn't explain much, just that it was something Grandma Margaret had left behind and we needed to handle it before I left for college. We drove to an office downtown. The sign outside read Bennett and Wallace Attorneys at Law. Inside, everything smelled like lemon polish and old paper. We were led into a corner office where an older man with kind eyes and a fraying tie stood to greet us. Harold Bennett. He looked at me with something close to concern when my mother introduced me. Then he cleared his throat and said he had the paperwork ready. I didn't understand at first. Something about a house, a transfer of interest, administrative forms. My mother smiled tightly and said Grandma had wanted things handled efficiently, that it would be simpler this way. Juliet was more mature, she said, and more capable of managing property. I would be too busy with school. It was just a formality. Harold hesitated. He glanced at me, then back at my mother. "Elaine," he said, "perhaps we should wait until she's 18. My mother's smile didn't falter. She said I was old enough to understand and that it was better done now than later. I sat there heart-thudding and asked if something was wrong. She waved the question away and handed me a pen. "You don't want to be tied down with maintenance and taxes while studying, do you?" I signed. I didn't ask about the house again. Not when I got my acceptance letter from the University of Washington. Not when I packed up my beat-up Toyota Corolla and drove north with 2 suitcases and a refurbished laptop. I told myself they were right. I didn't need a lakeside house. I needed a degree. A future. Something to call mine. Seattle gave me space to breathe. No framed portraits, no backhanded comments at the dinner table. Just lectures, code, and late nights at the library. I made a few friends. I worked part-time in the campus IT office. I called home every other Sunday and kept the conversations light. My mother mostly talked about Juliet's new auditions or how she was doing in New York. Juliet had gotten into Parsons. By her second year, she was already interning with a mid-tier fashion label. She posted pictures from rooftop parties and showroom launches. Every time I came home for Thanksgiving, there were new stories, new triumphs, new framed certificates on the hallway wall. I smiled. I nodded. I washed the dishes after dinner and left early the next morning. Once during winter break, my junior year, I arrived at the house to find the living room freshly redecorated. The photo above the fireplace had been replaced with a larger one, this time from Juliet's first national campaign. It was for a luxury handbag line, and her face was plastered on a billboard in Soho. My mother had cut out the article from the New York Times and laminated it. She showed it to me over breakfast like it was a family heirloom. When I told her I had been selected for a summer research fellowship in Palo Alto, she blinked, nodded, and then said, "Juliet might be in California that summer too, maybe they could visit." There was always a way to turn the spotlight back. At some point, I stopped trying to compete. I stopped volunteering information. I stopped hoping they'd ask. I went home only for the major holidays. I showed up, brought something store-bought to avoid criticism, and kept to myself. I answered questions politely, listened to Juliet's latest job offers and romantic dramas, and left before dessert if I could. But every time I stepped into that house, something inside me folded. It wasn't hate. It was the quiet ache of having no place where you belong, even among people who share your blood. Years later, when I would look back on that meeting in Harold Bennett's office, I'd remember the weight of the pen in my hand. The way my mother's voice had been sweet but firm. The way Harold looked at me like he wanted to say more but knew better than to push. I hadn't just signed a document that day. I had signed away something I didn't even realize I was supposed to fight for. And somewhere deep down, I think they were counting on that. In the spring of 2019, I met Mark at a sustainability conference in downtown Seattle. I wasn't supposed to be there. My manager had backed out last minute and handed me the lanyard with a tired shrug saying I should go instead. I had just turned 27, still working ridiculous hours debugging back-end systems for a green tech startup in South Lake Union. I figured the most I'd get out of the event was free coffee and maybe a break from fluorescent lighting. Mark was one of the speakers on a panel about adaptive reuse and community-centered architecture. He was articulate without sounding rehearsed, the kind of person who didn't have to talk too much to fill a room. After the session, I asked him a question about one of his case studies. He gave a thoughtful answer, then asked me what I did, and actually waited for the full response. We ran into each other again during the catered lunch and again at the rooftop mixer that evening. By the end of the week, he had emailed me a list of books he thought I might enjoy, most of them titles I already owned. He told me later that was how he knew. Our first date was quiet. We went to a bookstore in Capitol Hill and got sandwiches from a hole-in-the-wall deli nearby. We sat on a park bench under one of those drizzly silver Seattle evenings and talked about everything from urban planning to why we both hated pumpkin spice anything. He didn't mind silences. He didn't try to impress me. He just listened. I didn't know that could be enough to make someone unforgettable. It took me a while to believe he really saw me. I had gotten so used to performing at work at holidays in every conversation with my parents. But Mark didn't want me to be charming or impressive or polished. He liked that I thought through my words before speaking. He liked that I preferred coding alone in my apartment to loud parties. He said I was steady in a way most people weren't. The first time I told him about my family, I expected him to recoil or worse, try to fix it. But he just nodded, his face unreadable, and said, "It sounds like you've been surviving a long time. That must be exhausting." No one had ever said that to me before. We moved in together in late 2021. Our apartment was small, 2 bedrooms with a view of the Puget Sound if you leaned hard over the balcony. I brought my worn paperbacks and secondhand mugs. He brought a record player and an obsessive collection of vinyls. We made space for each other literally and otherwise. Every so often, my parents would call. The conversations were brief. My mother would ask if I'd seen Juliet's latest campaign or mention that Juliet had been invited to speak at a fashion panel in Miami. I'd say yes or no, depending on the truth, and then let the silence stretch until someone hung up. Juliet called once to ask if she could crash at our place for a weekend trip to Seattle. I said, sure. She arrived with 2 suitcases and a carry-on for just 3 nights, asked if we had oat milk, and spent most of her time FaceTiming her boyfriend in Milan. When she left, she forgot her scarf and texted Mark to mail it back. She hadn't said a word to me before leaving. By late 2023, Mark had become more than just a partner. He was my anchor. He knew my routines, my silences, the way I rubbed my left thumb when I was overwhelmed. He never pushed. But he was there when I fell apart after a terse phone call with my mother, or when I sat at the kitchen table for too long staring at nothing. That winter, on a Sunday evening, we were curled up on the couch watching a documentary about whales. I was in sweatpants, hair damp from a shower, and halfway through a cup of peppermint tea. Mark turned toward me, reached for the coffee table drawer, and pulled out a small wooden box. He didn't kneel. He didn't make a speech. He just held it out and said, "I want you to know you're the person I choose every single day. And I want to keep choosing you." I stared at the ring, simple and silver and exactly right. My throat closed. I nodded, then laughed, then cried. We ordered takeout and watched the rest of the documentary, pausing every now and then to just stare at each other like we couldn't quite believe it. I told my parents the next morning. My mom's response was silence. Then she asked if Juliet knew yet. My dad grunted something about congratulations. I didn't tell them about the proposal details. I didn't mention the ring. I didn't bother with the story. Juliet texted me later that evening. Just one line. Wow. Guess you beat me to it. I looked at the message for a long time, then turned off my phone. Mark was already setting the table, humming something off-key in the kitchen. I stood in the doorway watching him, wondering how someone like me had ended up with someone like him. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a runner-up. I felt chosen. We set the date for May of 2024, a late spring weekend on the Oregon coast. I had always loved that stretch of coastline where the cliffs dipped into gray sand and the wind made everything feel a little undone, like nothing had to be perfect to be beautiful. It felt right. It felt like us. We kept the guest list small, under 100. Just close friends, extended family I still spoke to, and Mark's side, who had welcomed me like I was already theirs. His mother, Linda, offered to help with the planning and meant it. She took me dress shopping, made endless lists of questions to ask caterers, and even helped me design the layout for the tented reception. She never once asked what my mother thought. She seemed to understand. I mailed the invitations 6 months in advance, both paper and digital. The printed ones were sent through FedEx with required signature delivery. The email invitations were tracked, each click timestamped. I kept every receipt. I didn't want to leave any room for excuses. I had learned. The response from my family was silence. Not right away. The emails were opened. I saw the read notifications. The paper invites were signed for by someone in their household. I followed up after a few weeks with a polite message, just checking and hoping they could RSVP when they had a moment. Nothing. When I finally called my mother, let it ring to voicemail, I left a message. Then another one. Then I stopped. Juliet sent a brief reply 2 months before the wedding. Sorry, I'll be in New York that weekend. Campaign prep. Hope it's nice. That was all. There was no follow-up from my parents. No email. No call. Not even a vague excuse. Just absence wrapped in silence. I tried not to dwell on it. I focused on the parts I could control. The food tastings with Mark's parents, the string quartet we found through a friend. The vows we decided to write ourselves, even though I hated public speaking. I wanted that moment to be ours. Pure, undiluted. Still, when I finalized the seating chart, I left the first 2 seats in the front row empty. I told the planner they were for my parents in case they changed their minds. She looked at me with a softness I hadn't expected and just nodded. The night before the wedding, Linda brought me a small velvet box. Inside was a pair of pearl earrings, simple and elegant. These were mine on my wedding day. I'd like you to have them, she said, fastening them gently to my ears. You're my daughter now. I blinked quickly and smiled. My throat was too tight to speak. The morning of the ceremony was misty, soft light threading through low clouds. I stood in the bridal suite watching the waves roll in my dress, hanging near the window, swaying slightly in the breeze. Mark didn't believe in first looks, said he wanted to see me for the first time walking down the aisle. So, I stood there alone, sipping coffee, adjusting the earrings every few minutes, letting the silence settle in my chest. When it was time, I stepped into the courtyard barefoot, the hem of my dress brushing the stone path, until I slipped on my shoes behind the hedges. Linda waited there with a bouquet and a hug that made my eyes burn. The music started. The guests stood. My heart thudded. I walked down the aisle, not with my father but alone, each step steadier than the last. Mark's face when he saw me made everything still. He looked like someone witnessing a miracle. I let that look carry me the rest of the way. The ceremony was short and honest. Our vows made people laugh and tear up. We kissed under the canopy while the ocean wind danced around us. But when I turned, I saw them. The 2 empty chairs. No one had taken them. Not even Mark's family. They had remained untouched, stark white against the deep blue backdrop. Like 2 ghosts waiting to be acknowledged. I smiled for the cameras. I hugged my college roommate. I drank champagne and spun barefoot with Mark on the grass. I thanked every guest with sincere joy. But those chairs never left my periphery. There was no father-daughter dance. Linda stepped in quietly when the music shifted, pulled me into a slow sway, and whispered, "I'm so proud of you." I rested my head on her shoulder and let myself believe it. Later, when Mark and I stood together under a canopy of twinkling lights, cutting the cake and feeding each other the first bite, I felt something close to peace. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't how I had once imagined. But it was ours. And even if my family had chosen not to show up, I had built something they could never take away. Something real, something grounded. We ended the night on the beach, just the two of us, our footprints overlapping in the wet sand, the ocean roaring in approval. I leaned into him and closed my eyes, letting the sound fill the spaces where words used to ache. I didn't cry. But every smile I gave that day carried a weight behind it, a quiet grief folded inside joy. The kind you learn to carry without showing. We spent 3 quiet days in Napa after the wedding, tucked away in a small vineyard inn just outside of St. Helena. It wasn't a long honeymoon, just enough time to let the chaos settle and breathe in something soft. Mark made reservations at a little bistro he loved, and I wore one of the dresses his mother gave me as a wedding gift. We sipped wine, walked between the vines, and let the silence speak more than any toast ever could. No grand gestures, no staged photos, just us. By the time we drove back up the coast to Seattle, the sun had shifted. Spring was folding into early summer. I unpacked my suitcase the same evening we returned and stood still for a long while, watching the folded white dress laid gently across the bed. My wedding dress. Worn once. Untouched by my mother's hands. The next morning, after 2 cups of coffee and 1 deep breath, I called home. It was a strange mix of dread and ritual, punching in my parents' number. I hadn't spoken to them in months. I had no idea what I expected. Maybe a civil hello, maybe a cold apology. I wasn't prepared for what actually came. My mother answered after 1 ring. Her voice tight and sharp sliced straight through the static. "So you're alive." I paused. "Hi, Mom." She didn't let me speak again before launching into it. Her words came fast, clipped, each sentence hitting like an accusation. "I can't believe you'd go through with it. Not even a courtesy call. Not even a second thought. You married that man and cut your family out like we never existed. That's what you've become." Ungrateful. I held the phone away from my ear for a second. My hands were steady. That surprised me. I sent the invitations, I said, keeping my voice as flat as I could. I emailed. I mailed them. You signed for them. I have the receipt. She scoffed. We never got anything. Don't lie to me, Camille. Do you think I'd just ignore my own daughter's wedding? I opened my laptop and pulled up the tracking history. The FedEx signature was there. Delivered at 2:46 p.m. Signed by Marisol. Marisol had been their housekeeper for over 10 years. My mother trusted her with the alarm codes, the wine cellar, even the holiday menus. She wouldn't misplace an envelope. I clicked into the email tracking. Opened at 10:13 a.m. Pacific Time 3 days after I sent it. The IP address matched their home Wi-Fi. I had cross-checked twice. Still, I didn't argue. There was no point. If you felt excluded, I said slowly, then I'm sorry. That wasn't my intention. But the invitation was sent. I did my part. She exhaled hard through the phone like she couldn't believe I'd dare speak calmly. You've changed, she said, and not for the better. You used to be quiet, respectful. I don't even know who you are now. Mark had walked in during the call. He didn't say anything. Just sat on the couch across from me, watching my face. I leaned back in the chair. I think I finally know who I am, Mom. I'm just not who you wanted me to be. There was silence. Then she hung up. I stared at the screen for a few seconds, watching it return to the home screen. Then I turned toward Mark. He didn't ask what she said. He didn't need to. He just opened his arms and I crossed the room and folded into them. Neither of us spoke for a long time. His hand moved slowly up and down my back. That was all. Later that night, I went back through the wedding photos, looking for the ones that hadn't been staged, the quiet shots caught between moments. Mark laughing while pouring lemonade. Linda fixing my dress strap. My best friend Emily holding a glass of champagne and blinking back tears. The wind lifting the hem of my gown. There were no photos of empty chairs. I had asked the photographer not to include them. I didn't want to memorialize that, but the space they occupied remained etched in memory. 2 seats, never filled. Never explained. I didn't call again. Neither did they. Juliet didn't text. My father never reached out. The silence became the answer. They didn't forget. They chose not to come. For the first time, I let that truth settle into place without trying to fix it. Not everything broken needs mending. Not every absence deserves a second invitation. And not every door once closed has to be reopened. A week after Mark and I returned from Napa, my phone rang during a quiet Sunday morning. I was curled up on the couch with a cup of Earl Grey watching sunlight stretch across the living room floor when I saw the name flash on my screen. Harold Bennett. It took me a second to place it, then it hit me. The attorney my mother had taken me to when I was 17. The day I signed papers I didn't understand. The man who had looked uncomfortable the entire time but said nothing beyond what was required. I answered. Camille, he said, his voice slower now, more gravelly. I hope this isn't a bad time. I told him it wasn't. That much was true. But I didn't tell him I had no idea what kind of time it was. This was a voice from a version of my past I'd buried. I've recently closed my law practice, he continued, and in the process of clearing out old files, I came across something that belongs to you. I stayed silent. It's your grandmother Margaret's original will. The one she signed in 2021. I sat straighter, he went on. In it, she left you the lakefront cabin in Chelan and a $500,000 investment portfolio. There's no mention of your sister. No caveats, no codicils. This was her last signed version, notarized and witnessed properly. My breath caught. The same cabin I had signed away years ago. The one Mom said Juliet deserved more because she was more family-oriented. The one I'd convinced myself I never wanted anyway. That will was never filed, he said. Your mother contacted me after Margaret passed. She said the family would be handling matters internally and asked me to destroy older documents. I didn't. Something told me not to. Why are you telling me now? I asked quietly. Because I should have spoken up back then. I regret not protecting your grandmother's wishes. You were a minor when we first met. I assumed your parents were doing what was best. But as I'm closing this chapter of my career, I couldn't just shred this and pretend it never existed. Margaret trusted me and I failed her. I owe you the truth. There was a long pause on the line. I wasn't angry. Oddly, I wasn't surprised either. I felt something else entirely. Seen. You said she signed it in 2021, I asked. Yes. Just a year before her health declined. She came into my office herself. Said she'd made her final decision about the girls and wanted to make it clear. Did she say why? He hesitated. She did. She said one of you had always taken from her. And one of you had always looked after her without expecting anything in return. I suppose you know which was which. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Harold offered to mail me a certified copy. I gave him our new apartment address. He said he'd send it the next day and include his contact if I needed further support. After we hung up, I just sat there for a while. Mark had stepped out to get groceries, and the quiet around me felt sacred. $500,000. The lake cabin. My grandmother had seen me. She hadn't forgotten me. She hadn't erased me. I stood up and walked over to the bookshelf. Tucked between a stack of engineering books and a wedding photo of Mark and me was a small wooden frame holding a picture of Grandma Margaret and me from my 12th birthday. We were on the porch of the cabin holding mugs of hot chocolate, her arm wrapped firmly around my shoulders. She always called me her quiet spark. Said I didn't need to shine loudly to light up a room. I never forgot that, but I had assumed she had. Later that night I told Mark everything. He listened, eyes never leaving mine, until I finished. So what do you want to do? He asked gently. I don't know yet, I said. But I do know this isn't just about property or money. It's about proof. That I mattered. That someone in that family saw me as more than a shadow behind Juliet. "Do you want to go see the cabin?" he asked. "Maybe, not yet." "You think she knew this would happen, that they'd try to erase it?" "I think she prepared for it," I said. "And Harold, he waited until the right time." "You think now is the right time?" "It feels like the first honest moment in years." We sat together in silence, the kind of silence that doesn't demand to be filled. It felt like the past was unfolding gently before me, not crashing back, but returning in pieces that made sense now. 2 days later, the envelope arrived, heavy, official, dated. Inside was a copy of the 2021 will and a short handwritten note from Harold. "I hope this brings you the clarity and dignity your grandmother intended for you to have. Be well, Camille." I placed the letter in our fireproof safe next to our marriage license and my graduate degree. That night, Mark and I walked down to Alki Beach. It was chilly even for spring. I let the cold wind bite at my cheeks as we looked out at the water. Somewhere out there beyond the dark waves and the horizon was the past I'd spent a decade trying to live beyond, but that past hadn't disappeared. It had simply been waiting for the right wave to carry it back to shore. And this time I wasn't afraid to open the box. It came in. I wasn't 17 anymore. And I wasn't going to sign anything away again. It started with a post. Juliet's engagement announcement landed like a silk bomb on Instagram. A staged photo of her hand, perfectly manicured, resting on a table beside 2 champagne flutes. The caption read, "He asked at the Met rooftop." I said yes. 2025, here we come. The next 48 hours were a blur of reposts, congratulatory emojis, and family members gushing in the comments. My parents uploaded a carousel of throwbacks from Juliet's childhood, complete with captions like, "Our shining star is getting married," and "Can't wait to watch our girl walk down the aisle." Not a word about their other daughter. Juliet's bridal shower was held at the Plaza in New York City. My mother raved about the floral wall designed by some celebrity florist. I had never heard of the guest list that included 2 reality television stylists and the 5-layer cake imported from Paris. She sent a group text to relatives with photos of the event. I wasn't included, but Donna forwarded them to me anyway. I stared at one photo longer than I expected to. In it, Juliet stood between my parents, laughing, glowing in a white cocktail dress. Behind them was the infamous flower wall, 1,000 silk roses in pale pink and cream. Beautiful, expensive, and fake. Just like everything they had ever built together. That night, I opened the box on my desk and began organizing the truth. There were the email confirmations from my wedding planner showing timestamps and receipt opens. I had used FedEx with signature confirmation to send the physical invites. The receipt showed my parents' address, the exact delivery time, and the name of the housekeeper who had signed for it. I printed screenshots of my wedding photos circling the 2 empty seats in the front row. I added a copy of the heartfelt letter I had written by hand, begging for peace, the one they had ignored. But it wasn't enough just to gather. I needed something irrefutable. So I called Donna. She didn't even let me finish before she said, "I still have the letter you sent last spring. I never told you this, but your mom told everyone it was spam mail. She said you were pulling a stunt for attention." Her voice cracked. But I knew better. That letter was too kind to be anything but sincere. My throat tightened. I thanked her, then asked if she'd be willing to make a short statement just in case. She said yes without hesitation. I scanned everything. The wedding correspondence. The diorama of silence they had curated. The bank statements showing the small inheritance left by Grandma Margaret had never been dispersed. And then the centerpiece, the notarized copy of the original will Harold had mailed to me, complete with timestamps, witness signatures, and the clear language naming me as the sole beneficiary of the lake house and the trust. I placed it all onto a USB drive. Then I added a letter of my own. Short, calm, factual. To whom it may concern, this package contains records previously withheld or disregarded concerning my grandmother's estate and my wedding. I release this not out of spite but for clarity and to ensure the truth finds its way into the right hands. No signature, just Camille Whitaker. I slid the USB into a padded envelope and tucked it into the inner lining of my carry-on. I didn't plan to mail it, not yet. But I would take it with me. Mark noticed the difference in me the moment I zipped the suitcase shut. "You sure?" he asked. I nodded. I'm done asking for permission. We boarded our flight to the Maldives on a quiet Thursday morning. The sky over Seattle was gray, the kind that always made you think twice before leaving home. But I didn't feel torn, I felt light. Mark held my hand during takeoff. We didn't speak much on the plane. There was a kind of peace in the silence. A knowing. Halfway through the flight, I looked out the window and whispered more to myself than to him. If they can build lies with flowers, I can plant truth with one letter. He didn't ask what I meant. He didn't need to. By the time we landed on the island, the air was thick with salt and sunlight. We were greeted with cold towels and drinks in hollowed pineapples. Mark had booked a private bungalow right on the water. Everything smelled like ocean and citrus and starting over. That night, as we watched the sun dip into the Indian Ocean, I took the envelope out from my bag and laid it on the table. I didn't say anything. Mark didn't ask. But the next morning he walked it to the resort's business center and arranged for secure international shipping. No return address, just a delivery to their lawyer's office. The truth was on its way, and I was finally free to enjoy the sunrise. The villa stood just a few feet from the shoreline, perched on stilts over turquoise water that shimmered in the early light. There were no walls around us, just soft white curtains that moved with the breeze like the tide itself was breathing. It felt like the world had forgotten how to be loud here, and for once I didn't miss the noise. Mark was in the kitchen area brewing coffee the way he liked it, patient and precise. I sat with my laptop on the daybed facing the ocean, the USB stick already plugged in. A folder named Truth blinked back at me. Inside it, a scanned copy of Grandma Margaret's 2021 will digital receipts from the wedding invitation, tracking a photo of the signed FedEx delivery, screenshots of opened emails. A photo of my wedding day, those empty chairs and the signed FedEx. Front row glaring like ghosts, and my handwritten letter. I reread the letter one more time. It wasn't long. It didn't blame. It didn't beg. I just wrote, I'm not asking for anything. I'm simply not staying silent anymore. With one deep breath, I hit send. The email went out to every family member on the list. Cousins I hadn't seen since high school graduations. Uncles who still thought I was studying business instead of software engineering. Aunts who sent mass holiday greetings with glittery fonts and silent expectations. I sent it to all of them. Harold Bennett had already prepared the formal submission to the county probate office. The original will, still bearing the ink of Margaret Whitaker's firm hand and clear intent, would be recorded within the week. He promised me that. His voice had trembled a little when we spoke last. He was old enough to know the weight of a mistake and young enough in conscience to still try to fix it. Mark walked over and handed me a cup of coffee. He didn't ask if I'd sent it. He didn't need to. I looked up at him. They have it now. He nodded and sat beside me. We stared out at the waves for a long moment, neither of us speaking. I took a sip. The coconut husk stacked near the porch swayed gently in rhythm with the palms. Somewhere down the dock, a staff member hummed something soft and wordless. Do you think they'll respond? I asked. Eventually, not because I cared about the answer, but because my voice needed to break the quiet. Mark shrugged slightly. Maybe, but that part isn't yours to carry anymore. I closed the laptop. Later that afternoon, we walked down the beach with our shoes in hand. The sun had tilted toward golden hour, painting the water in soft bronze. We passed couples lounging in hammocks, a group doing sunset yoga, and a little girl chasing a hermit crab with her giggling mother trailing behind. There was peace in knowing I wasn't ruining anyone's party for once. No confrontation, no explosion, no crying in public bathrooms. Just a woman in her 30s walking beside the man she loved after sending a truth the world pretended not to need. Back at the villa, Mark printed out a copy of the letter and the diurnal log from USPS. He packed them carefully into an envelope, addressing them to Aunt Rhonda, Uncle James, and Grandma's last surviving sister, Gloria. The older ones. The ones who didn't do email, or claimed not to. I watched him seal the envelope with steady fingers. You didn't have to, I said. He smiled. I know. That's why I did it. The next morning we woke up before dawn. The horizon was just a blur of lavender and silver. Mark had ordered breakfast, early local pineapple coconut bread, 2 boiled eggs. We sat outside, feet brushing against each other, watching the light grow into clarity. No new messages, no pings from anyone. No subject lines screaming betrayal or apology. Just the steady hum of the waves and the satisfaction of knowing that finally the silence was mine. Not forced. Not manipulated. Not punished. Mine. Mark poured us fresh juice into 2 mismatched glasses we found in the kitchenette. I raised mine a little. "To not fighting anymore," I said. "To not shrinking," he replied. We clinked gently. That evening, as the sky turned the color of apricots and ash, I opened my email one last time. There was a reply. It wasn't from my mother. Not Juliet. Not even Aunt Meredith, the self-appointed family liaison. It was from Donna. The subject line read, "Still have your letter." I clicked. "Camille, I've kept it. The one you mailed last year. The one no one else would talk about. I saw your wedding photo. I remember your grandmother's laugh. They lied. You didn't leave, you were pushed. But I always knew. Love, Aunt Donna." I closed the email slowly and let my hand rest on the lid of the laptop. Mark came up behind me and pressed his chin to my shoulder. His arms wrapped around my waist, warm and steady. "She remembers," I whispered. "Of course she does," he said. "You were never invisible to everyone." I leaned into him, my eyes tracing the horizon again. The moon had started to rise silver and full over the water, as if even it wanted to witness this small return of truth. That night we didn't speak much. We lay in bed with the doors wide open, listening to the waves, feeling the breeze wash over us like permission. I had no idea what would come next. Whether my mother would send another cutting message, whether Juliet would pretend it never arrived, whether the rest of them would argue or apologize or let it rot in their inboxes. But it didn't matter. I had sent it. From a place where nothing was holding me anymore. And that finally was enough. The first message came just after breakfast. Donna had received the printed copy. She didn't email. She called. Her voice trembled with something that felt like both relief and fury. "I read it, Camille. I read every word." And I showed it to Hank. Uncle Hank was the oldest of the siblings, retired union rep. Always had a presence like he walked out of a courtroom. Donna said he read it twice, then got quiet, then said, "This can't be buried." Within a day, I started seeing the ripple. The wedding website updated to reflect a shorter guest list. I heard from a college friend who had RSVP'd and now received a cancellation notice. One of Juliet's bridesmaids posted a cryptic quote on Instagram about truth and masks. Donna texted again saying 2 relatives had pulled out their sponsorship of Juliet's Vera Wang dress. And then my phone rang. My mother's name blinked across the screen. I let it ring once. Twice. 3 times. Then I picked up. "So this is what you've become," she hissed. "Gloating from a beach while tearing this family apart." I took a breath. If telling the truth is tearing us apart, maybe the problem was never the silence. Maybe it was the story you built on it. She scoffed. "You're just jealous, always have been. Juliet earned everything. And you're just trying to ruin it because you can't stand to see her happy." "Jealousy," I repeated. "If speaking the truth makes me jealous, then maybe all this time that's exactly what scared you most." She went quiet. Then the line cut. For a second, I stared at the phone, heart thudding harder than I wanted to admit. Mark walked in from the deck, pausing when he saw my face. "She called," I said. He walked over and wrapped his arms around me. It didn't stop there. That evening Harold emailed. "Elaine has contacted legal counsel," he wrote, "threatening defamation and civil interference regarding the estate. But don't worry, I've responded." I attached a copy of the original will and a legal brief detailing the coercion involved in the prior document. The age factor alone renders it invalid. I leaned back in the lounger, scrolling through the attached PDFs. Harold had done his homework. He cited every statute, every date, every instance I was underage when my signature appeared. Juliet, on the other hand, remained silent. Not a text. Not a post. Not a call. Not even a vague quote or reaction on social media. But that silence, oddly enough, spoke the loudest. People started noticing. Cousin Riley messaged me privately. "Did Juliet really know about the will?" I thought. "She said Grandma left everything to your mom." An old friend from high school posted a throwback photo of us at prom, tagging me. Under the comments, someone asked, "Isn't she Juliet's sister? What's going on?" At first I braced for backlash. But what I got instead was curiosity. Cracks forming in a version of the story that had always painted me as the lost cause. Donna called again. "They're talking," she said. Hank's furious. Says if Juliet had any integrity, she'd cancel the whole damn spectacle. "Is he saying that out loud?" I asked. She laughed. "He said it at brunch. Loud enough for everyone to hear." Mark brought me another coconut. We'd started calling them our peace offerings every time new drama unfolded. I sipped it slowly, watching the sun melt into the sea. "They're unraveling," I said softly. "Not your fault," he said. "They tied themselves in knots. You just stopped pretending it was ribbon." The next morning, I opened my inbox to another message. This one was from Juliet's wedding planner. Just a short line: "Please confirm whether you still plan to attend the wedding on the 12th of July. Seating adjustments are underway." I stared at the screen. For a moment, I considered responding. Then I simply deleted it. That evening, Mark and I sat outside under a thatched lantern, toes brushing beneath the table. "You're quiet," he said. "I'm just thinking about what it costs to stop lying. Even if the lie was never mine to begin with." He nodded. And I looked up at him. "It's worth it. Every second." He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Juliet's silence was no longer a shield. It was a mirror. And people were starting to see what had been there all along. The party, the perfection, the curated captions. None of it could hold back a truth that finally had its voice. And I wasn't whispering anymore. The road into Crescent Lake had changed since I last saw it in daylight. There were new developments, newer homes with identical mailboxes, a coffee shop where the old gas station used to be. But the final stretch, the one that curved around the lake like a whisper from the past, still held its quiet familiarity. The house came into view just as the sun slipped low behind the trees. It looked smaller than I remembered. Not in a disappointing way, but in the way that time has a habit of humbling memories. The navy blue shutters Juliet had picked stood out harshly against the faded clapboard siding. They didn't belong. Not to Grandma. Not to this place. I parked under the same maple that once dropped leaves we used to pile into mountains and jump from the porch into. For a long moment, I didn't move. Then I stepped out, walked up the path, and pushed open the front gate with the same rusty creak I'd heard 1,000 times in childhood. Only this time I was walking in not as a guest, not as a niece, not as the one left out. I was walking in as someone who finally had the right to speak. Inside, the smell hit me first. Not strong, not unpleasant. Just the familiar scent of cedar floor polish and old books. It was a memory wrapped in air. I stood in the doorway longer than I needed to, letting the house notice me. Houses remember, even when the people forget. The entryway had been modernized, Juliet's hand in everything from the framed fashion prints on the wall to the cold marble console table. I touched nothing. Just passed through like a tide slipping in. I walked to the kitchen where Grandma used to roll out pie crusts and sneak me slices of raw dough when my mom wasn't looking. Now there was a wine fridge, brushed metal cabinets, and not a single trace of the woman who once baked lemon cake on Thursday mornings. I stood still, let the silence wrap around me, then turned toward the stairs. Upstairs, the guest bedroom still had the quilt Grandma made for me when I was 10. Yellow and sky blue stitched with stars and clumsy hearts. Somehow Juliet hadn't gotten rid of it. Maybe she didn't know what it meant. Or maybe it didn't matter enough to erase. I sat on the edge of the bed, tracing the embroidery with my fingertips. I wasn't crying. Not quite. It was something quieter. The ache of things that should have been shared never were. From my bag I took out the envelope I had written days ago. 10 lines on cream paper folded neatly. No signature, no explanation. Just a message from one sister to another. You don't have to take everything. You just have to stop before there's nothing left. I opened the drawer of Grandma's old dresser. The one with the stubborn handle I used to tug until she showed me the trick to getting it open. It stuck like always. I smiled a little, slipped the letter and shut it softly. On the way back down, I paused at the front window. Across the lake, the trees shimmered in the light breeze. The reflection danced gently on the surface like it used to when Grandma sat on the porch humming old folk songs under her breath. I wasn't here to demand anything. The legal part was already in motion. Harold had filed the necessary injunction. A quiet freeze on the property, not a war. No headlines. Just the truth placed gently back where it belonged. But I couldn't leave without walking through the backyard. The oak tree was still there. Tall, wide, ancient. Its roots pushed up through the soil like gnarled hands holding on. We used to climb it, Juliet and I, pretending it was a castle. I reached out and placed my hand on the bark. "I forgive you," I whispered. "Not because you asked. Because I need the space back inside myself." Back at the car, Mark was leaned against the hood, arms crossed, watching me like he always did when he wasn't sure if I needed space or words. I didn't say anything until I was close enough to touch his shirt. "It's done," I said. He nodded. "Want to grab a burger on the way home?" "God, yes." As we drove away, I looked in the mirror once. The house sat still, surrounded by the kind of quiet that follows a storm. I didn't know if Juliet would find the letter that night or the next week, or maybe never. But I had left something behind. Not anger, not bitterness. Just a line in the sand. Not to divide us, but to stop the tide. Later that evening, Harold called. His voice was calm, but underneath it I could hear a quiet satisfaction. "The judge granted the temporary injunction," he said. "The house is frozen. Any attempt to sell, refinance, or transfer will be blocked until the hearing next month. We're also submitting the notarized copy of your guardianship revocation along with the updated affidavit. It's solid, thank you." He paused. "Camille, you didn't have to go there in person. I would have handled it." "I know," I said. "But I had to see it one last time. Not for the house. For me." Mark was in the kitchen again this time, tossing vegetables into a skillet while humming something out of tune. I leaned against the doorway, watching him move like someone who had built a life not out of revenge but out of peace. We ate by the fireplace, barefoot, wrapped in mismatched blankets. Somewhere in the middle of dinner, I started to laugh at a joke Mark made about the judge's name sounding like a breakfast cereal. It was the kind of laugh that shook loose something heavy in my chest. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking not about what came next, but about what I had let go of. I didn't need the house. I didn't even need the acknowledgement. All I needed was to stop letting other people define what I was worth. I turned off the light and closed my eyes. And for the first time in a long while, I slept without waiting for a phone call that never came. The sky outside my window was the soft gray of a Seattle morning, and the air smelled faintly of rain and rosemary. Mark had gotten up early to water the herbs, letting me sleep in for once. I woke to the sound of his footsteps on the porch and the quiet hum of life moving forward without drama or dread. It felt foreign, but good. That same afternoon, the Whitaker family held Juliet's pre-wedding preview event at a private club downtown. The kind of gathering where people sipped champagne they couldn't pronounce and smiled like their teeth were too expensive to touch air. I hadn't been invited, of course. That wasn't a surprise. But it didn't sting like it used to. Instead, I stayed home and baked sourdough. Mark had been perfecting a starter for weeks, and I finally felt calm enough to let the dough rise on my own terms. The kitchen filled with the smell of yeast and something steady. Not excitement, not revenge. Just the quiet satisfaction of choosing what the day would be. Meanwhile, across the city, Aunt Donna was buttoning up her navy blazer and slipping a folded piece of paper into her purse. It was a copy of The Real Will, of course, but more than that, it was the truth she had been quietly carrying ever since the Maldives. She didn't want to fight, she wanted fairness. And she knew there was only one person who could deliver it. She found Uncle Hank near the coat check, adjusting his reading glasses and rehearsing his speech under his breath. Donna touched his elbow gently. "Can we talk?" "Just for a moment," she said. They found a corner near the back patio, far from the curated string quartet and the bar dripping in white orchids. Donna unfolded the paper slowly and placed it into his hands. She told him the truth. About Margaret's intentions. About how Camille had been erased long before any wedding. And about how it was time someone said something real into a microphone that wasn't meant to lie. Hank read every word, then folded the will back up and slipped it into his jacket. His eyes looked heavier when he turned back toward the ballroom. Not angry, just awake. When he took the stage later, the lights dimmed and a hush settled across the room. Juliet beamed beside her fiancé in a dress that shimmered like frost. Elaine stood behind her holding a flute of something golden gaze sharp as glass. Hank cleared his throat. I was asked to speak about celebration tonight, he began. But I think it's also a moment to speak about clarity. About family. About what happens when the weight of silence starts cracking the walls we've pretended to live inside. The room shifted. A subtle ripple moved through sequins and silk. I won't name names, he continued, because truth doesn't need to humiliate anyone to exist. But it does need to be heard. We have spent years pretending certain things didn't happen. That some voices mattered more than others. That choices were made in good faith when perhaps they were not. Juliet's smile faltered. And so I just want to say this. Hank said, his voice firmer now. Everyone deserves to be seen. Especially those we've spent too long looking away from. It wasn't a eulogy. It wasn't a takedown. But it was enough. Afterward, a few guests left early murmuring excuses about sudden headaches and traffic on the 405. Elaine stormed out mid-toast, leaving her wine half-finished and a small stain on the cream tablecloth. Juliet said nothing, but her fingers clutched her napkin until it looked like paper that had been drowned. Back at home, I stood at the kitchen island slicing into the still warm loaf. Mark handed me butter from the fridge and grinned. That smells dangerous, he said. We'll survive, I replied. We brought our plates to the living room and sat cross-legged on the couch, an old wedding video playing on mute in the background. Not Juliet's, not mine, just one we found online. Two people laughing over cake and bad dancing, the kind of footage that reminded you weddings weren't supposed to feel like trials. At one point, I caught my own reflection in the dark glass of the television when the screen went black between scenes. I looked, still. Not sad, not victorious. Just there. Mark nudged me. You okay? I nodded. Just thinking how peace sneaks up on you when you stop trying to audition for it. He chuckled and passed me another slice. Later that evening, as the rain finally began to fall, I sat by the window and watched droplets race down the pane like little runners chasing truth. Somewhere in that city, my sister was still spinning her version of the story, still smiling like nothing had changed. But the room had gotten quieter. And some people had started listening. Not because I demanded it, because I stopped disappearing. That night before bed, I scrolled through the texts I hadn't answered in days. One from Donna, you didn't have to be there tonight. You were heard anyway. I typed back, thank you. For standing when I couldn't, she responded with a photo. The last lemon cake Grandma had baked sitting on her old ceramic dish. The one with the chipped edge we all used to fight over. Some things stay sweet even after the truth cuts through. I saved the photo to my favorites, turned off the light, and leaned into the silence. Not afraid of what tomorrow would bring. Not needing to chase anyone down. Not anymore. The waves moved in slow breath, curling and stretching toward the shore like they knew I was watching. I sat on the wooden deck behind our cottage, a worn journal open across my lap. The pen in my hand felt heavier than it should have. Not because I didn't know what to write, but because I finally did. For the past few weeks I had circled around the idea of it. Not a memoir, not a confession. Just a story. Mine. In my words. On my terms. I didn't want revenge anymore. I didn't need apologies. I didn't need anyone's permission to make peace with the past. But I couldn't keep carrying silence like it was a prize for good behavior. So I started with the truth. I wrote about Grandma Margaret's laugh and the way her house smelled in summer. I wrote about the birthday where everyone forgot me except her. I wrote about Juliet's silver dresses and our mother's rehearsed excuses. About the days I thought disappearing would hurt less than speaking up. About the moment I realized I was wrong. I didn't write it to accuse anyone. I didn't write it for sympathy. I wrote it because stories untold rot like fruit in a drawer. Because if you don't tell your own, someone else will write a version where you're barely a footnote. Mark came out with 2 mugs of coffee. He handed me one and kissed the top of my head. "You've been out here a while," he said. I nodded, tapping the pen once on the edge of the notebook. "I think I'm writing it all down. For real this time." He sat beside me, legs stretched out, his arm resting lightly across the back of my chair. "Is it for the world or just for you?" "Both, I think," I said. "But mostly for anyone who's ever felt erased and stayed quiet about it." The wind pulled at the pages gently, as if curious too. "You don't have to prove anything anymore," Mark said. "Not to them, not even to yourself." I smiled into the rim of my cup. "I'm not trying to prove, just reclaim." We sat there for a long time, the ocean humming in the background like it had something to say but was content letting us speak first. I thought about what had changed since the Maldives. Since Donna mailed the truth. Since Uncle Hank stood up in a room full of curated silence and cracked it wide open. I hadn't heard from Juliet. Not directly, but I saw a photo online of her standing stiffly in a courthouse hallway, lips pressed tight, flanked by lawyers with too many folders. Elaine had gone quiet on Facebook. That might have been the biggest miracle of all. The hearing about the house was still weeks away, but Harold was confident the will would be honored. More importantly, the version of the story they tried to bury had already been unearthed. You couldn't erase someone who decided to stop hiding. The sun shifted higher. I closed the journal and placed it on the small table beside me. "Do you regret any of it?" I asked. Mark. He looked at me, eyes soft, thoughtful. "Only the part where I let you carry too much alone. But everything else, number. Because it led us here." I reached for his hand. "Here's not bad," I said. "It's more than enough," he replied. Later that day, we walked along the shoreline, barefoot and quiet. There were still questions I hadn't answered. Still bruises that took their time healing. But I no longer measured my worth by what my parents gave or what my sister took. I was building something different. Something that didn't need anyone's permission to exist. That evening, I sat down with my laptop and typed the first line of the story. Not for a publisher. Not for a courtroom. Just for whoever needed to hear it. "You don't have to win," I wrote. "You just have to stop letting someone else write your chapter." I paused and looked out at the horizon. The sky had turned that deep coral color that always made me feel like time was slowing down on purpose. Like maybe the universe wanted to linger here with me for a while. Mark came in from the kitchen and leaned on the doorway. "Hungry always." He laughed and came over, resting a hand on my shoulder. "You know," he said, "we don't have to fight for anything anymore. We just have to live the part that's ours." I covered his hand with mine. "Exactly." And just like that, I knew the ending of the story. Not the one where someone gets exposed or punished or made to weep in regret. But the one where you stand in your own light and finally feel the warmth. I closed the laptop gently. Tomorrow, maybe I'd share it. Or maybe not. That part didn't matter yet. What mattered was this. I had lived it. I had named it. And now I had let it go. If you've ever been pushed aside in your own family, if you've ever been written out of your own story, tell me. Leave a comment. Share what they didn't see. Because the most powerful thing you can ever do is simply not disappear. And if this story meant something to you, stay. There are more stories like mine, and maybe one of them sounds like yours.